Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Movies We Dig. Today, we're debuting a new recurring segment we're tentatively titling Extremely Strained and Incredibly Forced. It's an exercise in what we call classical reception, where we search for connections between the ancient and modern worlds, or, more often, imagine some into existence. And joining us today is a very special guest to pitch our very first reception, three-peat returning guest, and my advisor, Dr. Ayelet Haimson Lushkov. Welcome, Ayelet. Woo!
Hi. As your advisor, Colin, this is exactly what I hoped you would be.
I've really come up in the world, right?
You really have. You are the pride and joy of my advising career.
Beautiful. Well, we have that on record. So I didn't want to spoil it out of the get-go, but I think that we need to be considering the coconut.
Yes.
Well, funny you should say, in fact, because as I was contemplating my pitch, it occurred to me that, in fact, we shouldn't think of the great cinematic masterpiece that is Moana as in fact a reception of anything, because it is its own, mythological tradition. And so it would be imperializing and colonializing and in general poor taste to kind of see Moana as a reception of anything, much less the Aeneid. But then I also thought that the Aeneid is in fact an imperializing, colonializing text. And so it would be very much on brand for it to kind of reach from the shadows of the white man past and colonize Disney. But so in that spirit, I will confess that my main sort of pitch is boats and sort of voyages of discovery, and specifically the one where you try to save your people by taking them somewhere else, with a father figure of incomplete dedication to said voyage and divine interruptions / helpful attempts at getting out of the way. So that's my pitch.
You had me at boats.
Okay, I have a question, I guess, to start off on this, because I feel like if we're arguing Moana as an Aeneas figure, why can we? Well, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I feel like the original mission that she has is just to save her people by making her island not be falling apart. Right. So I feel like originally there is no traveling of the people. I feel like that becomes sort of part of her storyline later on. And they used to do this voyaging, but that's not the immediate answer to the problem. So then why is this an Aeneas figure and not an Odysseus figure trying to get home?
See, the Odysseus is just cheap and dirty, I feel.
Everything is always Odysseus. I mean, Aeneas is an Odysseus figure, right?
Yeah. And also, in the end, there is a voyaging of the people. Mm-hmm. The somewhat reluctant and inexplicable, voyaging, because if she has made her island not fall apart, then why do they need to voyage? But leaving that aside,
sure.
Yes.
I feel like that was just the thorny question that I could get in there.
just you're that committee member or that person in the panel.
I'm feeling sassy today.
Reviewer number 2.
Make this a completely different thing.
And maybe just so for listeners' sort of benefit, just a little bit of context. So we're talking about the Aeneas of the Aeneid fame, right? Or of basically a story by Roman poet Virgil of a guy who flees the destruction of one city, Troy, to go found another city that will be Rome. It's not Rome yet. And trials and tribulations ensue, some of them on the ocean, some of them in Tibet. There are parallels of there is an underworld journey, right? Where the hero, which is not unique to, in many mythological corpuses, there's a part where the hero goes.
I have more questions about this too.
You said, there are gods who intervene, including Neptune and Hera and Jupiter and Venus, and they sort of get involved. And then the notion of finding homes, outside and across the ocean broadly. I don't know. Christy, you have any?
So admittedly, I'm not as familiar with the Aeneid, but we've been talking about it a lot in terms of this colonizing aspect, especially. And strangely enough, we're bringing this question of the idea of home and identity and traveling to like leaving one home for another. So I'm kind of curious how you see that connecting here with, yes, explain to me the aspect of home and the need to travel to have a home, as like, how does Moana connect to that, and how does that compare to the Aeneid itself?
Well, I'm starting to feel like I'm taking my qualifying exams, which is not.
I know. I was like, this is wonderful. Shoes on the other foot now. But
Yeah, I don't think I'm enjoying this.
Claude, where's my manager? Get him in.
I need to speak to my agent.
This interview is over.
But no, but the dark secret of the Aeneid obviously is that home is. Is this a sweary podcast?
Yeah, you
I
can.
can't remember. So yeah, so home is a big pile of crock. This is not my normal swearing, by the way. I can swear better than this. But Aeneas is like, oh, we're going home, but he's never been to Italy. He doesn't know anything about it. It's not home in any meaningful sense. So yeah, it's a constructed, made up idea. And they have to stretch really hard to kind of make it home. There's like this weird prophecy about how the true land of the sons of Dardanus is like someplace in the west, Italy being west of Troy.
Right.
Right. They plumb
and they keep landing on places. And like, I use a meme when I teach the Aeneid in my mythology class, where it's like the guy with the pit with the butterfly, and he's like, is this Italy? And it's like everywhere that's not Italy. And because they land a place and they're like, maybe this is Italy. And then it, for whatever reason, turns out not to be.
Yeah. So like the concept of home is not really like, it's more of a finding a place that we can stay for a while and not have it suffer some massive ecological disaster. Exactly.
I think my perception of that is also like home is the friends we made along the way.
It's like Asgard. It's a people, not a place.
Asgard, yeah. It's a people, not a place.
To quote a podcast I listened to, Asgard is very much a place.
But like, yeah, it's like this anywhere that is safe and like productive for this group of people, I feel like can be called home, which I think in itself is a really like beautiful theme. And I think I really like that about Moana, which is like such an emotional and beautiful movie, but it has this very family centered, I guess, love in it. And I get that, like as a tie-in to the Aeneid, as like these are our people that we need to take care of.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that kind of is like maybe the first sort of theme Ayelet mentioned of the role of like the father figure who presides over. So like in the Aeneid, we have Anchises, who's Aeneas' dad, and is as a prophet of in what's the word, like he's unreliable exactitude.
And then he's always wrong.
Yes, the scoreboard is against Anchises as a prophet. Yes. But he's kind of there. And then where in Moana we have Tui, played by Tamara Morrison, who's kind of Moana's. And there's Tui, who's the one who wants to keep people from leaving the island to sort of keep everyone safe, because ships stopped coming back and the world became more and more dangerous because of the sort of ecological imbalance of Te Kā. But then balancing that out is Rachel House's Tala, who's the grandmother, to Tui's father, who's the one kind of encouraging Moana to go on the journey. And so, yeah, I don't know, Ayelet, how do you see like the sort of Anchises, Tala, Tui triangulation?
I mean, Anchises is lovely, but just always wrong, right? He's made one good decision, which was to get it on with Venus when he had the opportunity, and pretty much ever since he's been useless. A bit like, like Prince Philip, right? He's just there. But he's well intentioned and he really wants to help. He's just completely wrong about the situation and the solution. And you can see that with Tui, right? Moana keeps saying, well, let's go beyond the reef, and he's like, let's not. And clearly the correct answer is to go beyond the reef. So and even Grandma Tala, she's very much like, you have to listen to the voice inside, but it's not like she says, what you need to do is go on this voyage, right? So Moana is kind of dealing with, older figures who don't give her quite all the information that she needs or wants. And so she has to go out and find it on its own because, right, Moana is also a teenager Bildungsroman where she kind of sets off on her own journey. So you said incredibly forced. So I'm like,
strain as much as you need.
Doubling down. But, I mean, the reason the Aeneid works is like, right, the other dirty secret about the Aeneid is that everything can be the Aeneid, right? It's such a flexible story that, like, The Hobbit,
Watership Down.
Yeah.
That's my Aeneid.
Game of Thrones, everywhere. Wherever you have a protagonist in search of a better life, there is the Aeneid.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Exactly.
Oh my god!
It's the joke where it's just turtles all the way down, right? It's just it's Aeneid's all the way down.
Yeah, it really is. Oh my god! Yeah. I actually really like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as the Aeneid. That makes a scary amount of sense to me. But I'm getting off topic. Okay.
The mutual hatred for children.
Yeah. Okay, I have some underworld questions. Because I feel like that is such a staple of the epic, right? Like we always have a journey to the underworld for some reason. And I would say the journey to the underworld here is when they go to the realm of monsters to retrieve Maui's hook.
Right.
Which then they like literally descend into like a cavern. They like go to a place and they do a specific like ritual, which Aeneas has to do, goes to a specific place, does a specific ritual, descends to the underworld. But I think what like happens in the underworld feels different. So they like retrieve a magical item from the underworld in Moana. But I also feel like there's very much like when her grandmother's ghost comes to visit her, has like an underworld-esque feeling to it, to me. Because it's like sort of gaining that knowledge, even though we're not still in the realm of monsters, it still has that speaking to someone who is dead and sort of gaining knowledge and encouragement.
Right. So there's the pretentious answer, and then there's the like less pretentious answer. Which one do you want first?
I like to lead with pretension. That's usually my
please
style.
Lead with pretension, please.
So Lucan, one of the earliest successors of Virgil, right? His shtick is to take the Aeneid and turn it on its head. So if the Aeneid is a poem of like national building, then Lucan writes all about national self-destruction. So appropriately, when he gets to his underworld scene, instead of sending his protagonist to the underworld, he has one of his many protagonists resurrect a corpse. And the corpse is like, tells them all sorts of prognostications of doom. So on the extreme end of pretension, you can say that Moana is in fact a window illusion to two, right, of the foundational epic moments. Yep. However, if you don't want to get debarred from the SES, I mean, at this point, you kind of have to ask, what reception is and where you kind of draw the line between reception and the sort of fervid imagination of the reader. Now, I think, pretty extreme on this, and I say where you find reception is reception, right? This is Martindale's famous dictum that reception is, or meaning is constructed at the point of reception, and likewise reception is constructed at the point where you make meaning. So if you see something reception-y in something, then there you are, and it doesn't need to be one-on-one, and it doesn't need to be acknowledged, and it doesn't need to be sort of checking off. It's not like, in Indo-European linguistics, they say that if you can get 3 branches of inheritance, then there's a common ancestor. But we don't do that with reception studies, right? It's not like you need 3 checkboxes and then like
check all the boxes.
Yeah. You don't need to find like a genealogical link or something.
Right.
Exactly. So if you build it, then it is built. Right. Yeah. The other side of this is kind of what some people have called philological fundamentalism, which is very much like it needs to like acknowledge Virgil directly. The scenes have to be like in a certain order and follow certain like plot development, and
that seems boring.
Reverse them, right? And things like that. So, I think if you start thinking about reception as an exercise that is grounded in the the reader, right?
Mhm.
Then you're more honest to the practice that actually happens, right? Which is we read stuff and then we have ideas and then we see if they work out. But also it means that you can sort of connect more text and do kind of more interesting things. And, there's no reception police, right? It's not like someone's going to come along and be like, no, Moana is not the Aeneid.
Well, we might at the end of this.
We should have a segment where I play police sirens or the reception police are here, you're being carted away.
Yeah.
That speaker, they're now in jail.
So in some sense, instead of being like, well, is this that? How does this match onto that? It's kind of a more interesting exercise to ask, okay, but so what, right? So what do we get out of reading Moana as the Aeneid, or what do we get out of reading the Aeneid as a parallel to a kind of a myth, a voyaging myth that is grounded in a different time and a different place? Or, what does Disney have to do with all of it? So there's lots of threads that you can pull, and which ones you pull is kind of depends on what you think about what reception is and how it works. So, like I said, I'm very loosey-goosey. I'm like, everything can be the Aeneid. This podcast can be the Aeneid. I just need to think about how. But, I don't know, maybe Colin is like Aeneas and the two of you are Cerastus and Sergestus, and I'm Anchises or something. But whatever. We can work with this. We can massage the idea. So yeah, I don't know. Does that?
I love that answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think back to Lin-Manuel Miranda is heavily involved in Moana, and a lot of his storytelling aspects comes from his background of displacement, but still belonging and finding communities of belonging, which seems to be a theme we see in the Aeneid as well. So do you think those parallels come from possibly Lin-Manuel's experience of displacement and finding a home, or are the stories themselves being ways to frame that experience and understand it?
I mean, I think there's a sense in which you can boil almost any universal experience into, right, an archetype, right? What do displaced people do? They try to find a place when they're not displaced. And then whether that is successful or unsuccessful, whether they want to stay where they got to or go back home, right? There are there are many questions to flesh out this narrative. But yeah, and so I really like when you think about this kind of modern popular reception, thinking about sort of cousinhood, right? So Lin-Manuel Miranda also did more recently, and perhaps now more famously, he's involved with Encanto, which is another story about,
your parents being wrong.
Yes, right, about
displacement and home,
yes. Right, and your parents being wrong and finding your destiny, right? But the kind of the backstory of Encanto is quite perfectly a miniature Aeneid, right? They run away from a city that's being destroyed, and then they are kind of led away by Abuela to this new and magical place. So I think it's definitely a story that Lin-Manuel Miranda is interested in, right? Mm-hmm. And whether consciously or not, right? And he keeps playing with it. So yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. Yes, the answer is yes.
I'm also now thinking about Hamilton, which is about somebody leaving, making a journey to America to create their own systems and create their own world.
And then have a duel.
Where
in a spirit,
boys and girls, you should all go do.
So,
I think we just psychoanalyzed Lin-Manuel Miranda a little bit there.
There's a lot of material out there that's, not to read too heavy into an auteur theory, but there, it is, art is a personal and, creative endeavor. And so there's a lot of material out there to work with. So sometimes you can't not but help, make those threads.
And it is open to him to come on the podcast and be like, you people are wrong.
Yeah.
And I demand my vengeance.
He does make guest appearances. It's not outside the realms of possibility.
So,
But I agree that the story of displacement is such a human story that I think we find in so many places and is still like happening today, right? So I think it's not surprising that a displacement story would really find a lot of audiences and be really meaningful for people, but also would like really connect to people who are making art and being creative. So I really agree with that. I think that's an interesting way to look at that.
Well, and that is also the difference between the Aeneas story and the Odysseus story, right?
Yes.
Odysseus is not displaced. I mean,
but yes.
Yeah.
His home's there. It's just out of reach.
It's
Well,
just
and then he comes
Yes.
back, takes off all of his clothes, and kills all the suitors.
and
Right?
kills everyone.
Yeah. So, you know, he is not in the end actually. I mean, Odysseus is self-displacing, right? Which is like his
Yes.
right great tragedy. But he is not, in fact, displaced human, whereas Aeneas is, and you know, goes about being undisplaced in a variety of ways, none of which very flattering.
And this is leading me to kind of like another thread, thinking even just in the sort of corpus of Lin-Manuel Miranda, of another sort of theme that really, I think, kind of dovetails with the being displaced and finding a new home and, you know, creating a new home for yourself, is also like kind of concurrent, and like we mentioned in Kanto and Moana too, but also trying like proving oneself, or sort of proving something, or some kind of like self-actualization, like where, was it Mirabelle? Is that the character in Encanto? She has to, you know, figuring out what her power is, or for Moana is sort of learning how to navigate and how to sail. Hamilton, you know, being a, you know, sort of making a spot for himself in this, you know, boys club that is the founding fathers. And that probably, I think also probably there's a lot of resonance you can find with Lin-Manuel Miranda. And this, I think, is also just thinking at like a meta level, is also somewhat true with both Aeneas like in the text, but also like Aeneas as a heroic figure who's kind of in the sort of, you know, body of Greco-Roman myths or whatever. Aeneas and the Aeneid is a sort of latecomer to the game and has to sort of fit in among all these other heroes who have sort of been out there in the world. And Virgil too, as a poet, you know, but, you know, so Aeneas is out there. He's got to share the world with the Herculeses and the Odysseuses and the Achilles of the world. And that's another anxiety of the Aeneid, is because also one of the questions that we love to ask our students is like, how heroic is Aeneas?
So Aeneas is basically, and here we're about to embark on another voyage of perception. Aeneas is basically, his only claim to fame, right, is that he is like literally the boy who lived, right? Like that's what the Iliad tells us about this, right? This loser right here is the only one who's not gonna like, he's the only one who's gonna survive this war, right? And so when Virgil goes back, he's like, well, I only have this guy to work with, right?
Yeah.
Right, and the myth of Aeneas, right, like circulates in Italy a lot before Virgil, so it's not like he's not working ex nihilo. But Aeneas himself, yes, he's a hero, just like all the other Iliadic hero. He fights some people and kills some people, but like Diomedes steals his horses, and like it's just, he's a bit of a cringy hero, right? Until he actually goes through the Aeneid. And so whenever I do this exercise with my students, we always land on Harry Potter, because how can you not, right? And then I say, you know, guys, Harry Potter is just Oedipus Rex. And they look at me blankly, and then I realize that they don't know what the Oedipus Rex is. So I then explain that, right, Oedipus has a plague, trying to get rid of the plague. Someone tells him the source of the plague is within the city, and he starts investigating until he discovers that it's him. He's the problem because of the whole sleeping with your mother situation. So when we talk about, like, you know, the self-actualization and finding the, you know, the person within, right, then that kind of, I kind of have nothing going for me except for inheritance and the accidents of survival. And now I need to make something of myself, right? Yeah. That is an, you know, a long-standing fascination of, especially the modern novel, but also of like, right, ancient stuff. Yeah. So,
and I think this is probably where we also sort of detect the hand of Disney looming over, because this is, you know, the Moana and the Mirabelles of, you know, fit very much into, you know, particularly in the last 30 or something years of Disney protagonist stories of who have to various degrees, like different sort of arcs of self-actualization or realization. I'm thinking like Aladdin in particularly being kind of a good example of that, less so than say like Snow White or Ariel or Belle, although again, those are a little, and then the sort of more recent ones like in Frozen and in Moana.
It's Princess and the Frog as well.
It's much more. All of which, I mean, many of these we're also mentioning. These are all Musker Clements creations, right? As the sort of creative writing team who pitched these sort of stories, and also did Hercules and among other things. I lost sort of the thread of where I was going with that idea.
There is no thread. The thread is what you make with.
There was my thought of I'm going to get the Shakespeare line wrong, but I think it's from Twelfth Night. That's like some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them, and what you do with that, basically.
Yeah.
There's some chosen one archetypes in there, but I think also just like the accident of survival is a part of a chosen one theme in itself.
Aeneas is kind of your chosen one par excellence, right? Because like very early in the Aeneid, Jupiter kind of sits down with Venus, and he's like, "Okay, it's going to be okay because like fate has appointed this guy to found this empire that's going to be Rome." And then the Roman reading is like, "Oh, that's us." But really that's like sort of almost maybe the totality of Aeneas's sort of claim to fame that we were talking about.
Well, and so cycling back to Moana, right? The Maui character arc is very much about like, but am I worthy, right? Am I like, did they just save me, right? Did the gods just save me because they saved me, or did they save me because I was worthy of being saved, right? And so he is a sort of a foil, right, for Moana, so Maui never tires of telling Moana that she's basically just really full of herself, right? Because the ocean picked her and she believed it. And so they are this like, right, this tension between someone who is very secure and someone who is very insecure. And then the gender dynamics obviously are flipped because he is a big guy who is very insecure and she is a small girl who is not insecure. Although she has her insecure moments too, right? But on the whole, she has a sense of purpose and mission.
Her line is, I am Moana, right? That's her big kind of line is, that great, sort of declaration of self. Yeah. Maui, we haven't really talked a lot about Maui
I
yet.
was trying to think about a parallel for the Maui character in the Aeneid, and I'm not sure I really settled on one that I liked.
What were your candidates?
Well, because I feel like he's like both hinders and helps. So, like, I think at a certain point, he's just sort of like the other half of Aeneas. Like, both of them are kind of this Aeneas character. But I was trying to think of some sort of like godlike character that kind of helps or pushes.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, but like none of them really felt... because the ocean is also there, and I feel like the ocean is also kind of a helping hand, but also is like very happy to just step back and like let Aeneas do whatever he wants, or let Moana do whatever she wants. So I was kind of stuck. I was going in circles.
I would say, but the thing I keep coming back to with Maui is actually really, I'm thinking less about Virgil or Greek myth or anything like that, and more of just like Maui kind of seems like they really, I think, nailed with Maui what they sort of tried and didn't quite successfully do. They being Clements and Musker, tried and didn't quite successfully do with the 1997 Hercules. I think, where like, as much as I like that movie, I think it has some problems with the like Hercules arc and like what is he like his sort of arc of proving worthiness, where Maui I think has a much more just sort of straightforward and streamlined and effective version of like, the insecurity about, why was I saved and how do I prove my worth, myself worthy of the powers and this divine status and all this stuff. And is it through deeds, pulling up islands, pulling down the sun, making coconuts, all of that stuff. And it's never, and then the missing element to sort of tie it all back around is the people element of like, Maui is there to help people. And so in that sense, to me, he's kind of like, a character that's not really in the Aeneid, but is kind of maybe looming over everything, which is sort of like Hercules, who's this like, your prototypical like culture hero, the guy who goes and like makes the world so that we can live in it. But I'm getting far afield.
Well, could he in some aspects be the son of Aeneas then? Like
Aeneas,
something to
yeah.
prove, but is background to it?
I mean, Euless sucks. I really
We were just in my Latin class today. We were just reading the Wheelock's version of the 38 Latin stories, the version of Nisus and Euryalus, just today. So the Aeneid is like on the brain. I was literally I was just talking about the Aeneid, and Euless shows up in that story, and I was like, I don't really have much to say about him other than that he is the son of Aeneas.
He's there.
He has if you read, was it Ursula Le Guin's Lavinia, Euless? She's always she kind of comes like, I didn't really like Euless.
Yeah.
Like we never really got along.
That is my background on his character is Lavinia, because I've read that and haven't read the Aeneid fully. So
I mean, Euless is just like, I don't know. He's a self-entitled.
He's when you cast a minor character in the movie who's like the nephew of the producer or something like that, because he kind of exists to my mind just to like make the connection between Augustus and Julius Caesar and Aeneas and everyone else. Like he seems to be like he's there as like a shout out to appease the audience or something like that. But I don't know.
I mean, in some ways, he's the reason this whole thing, right? Like the whole Aeneid is. But think of the children, right? Aeneid is constantly like, but this is fine. This is west of Troy. There's this nice girl that I can check up with. Everyone has jobs. Everything is great. Can we just stop now? And someone, his dad, the god, like someone is just like, but won't you think of the children? This is not where Euless is supposed to grow. And so he keeps going until he gets to Italy. And the first thing that Euless does is start a big war because he can't keep his friends from like not shooting
a pet deer.
Like, he's been specifically told not to shoot. Right? Like, and then like Aeneas leaves him behind and he's just like, let me do completely the opposite of what like he tries, but he's just not.
He's like, hey, the chicken.
Yes.
Yes.
He is. I did think of that when I rewatched Moana. I was like, there must be more to him than meets the eye, but yeah.
No, he's just trying desperately to eat that rock.
Yeah.
Just wants to eat that rock.
The chicken lives.
Yeah. Apropos of nothing, I just enjoy how they set up in the movie. Like that you thought, and like all the advertising in the first 10 minutes of the movie, you thought it was going to be that cute little pig that's going to be the animal companion. It's like, no, it's the chicken who might be like, it has like had a frontal lobotomy.
Yeah.
I love Hey Hey so much.
Hey, the best.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, poor Hey. I don't know. There is that great scene where like Moana gets offered some pork and she's like, that's great pork. And then she sees Pua and it's like, I gotta go.
I mean, there kind of is also the think of the children aspect, because everything on the village, there's a lot of Moana's like teaching the small children. Does she have a younger brother? I'm trying to remember. Or is there like
I don't think so.
Okay. I mean,
in original designs, she was supposed to have siblings that were good at sailing and she wasn't. But I think they cut siblings out of her storyline.
A little backstory. So the first person to take a pass at the script, so Musker and Clements like pitched basically, as many of these Disney animated films are started, Musker or Clements, one of them like reads a thing or gets into a thing. And this one happened to be Polynesian myth. And then they pitch a movie idea and then Disney sends them to the place for like 3 weeks. So they take like a 3-week trip in like Fiji and Samoa. And they did this exactly with like Mulan and Lion King and Hercules. Like they take like a trip to like, say they've done their due diligence. So then the story goes through different passes. And the first person to take a pass on the story was Taika Waititi. And he sort of made a joke that basically like the only part about his script that exists was like, we start with the ocean. And I think in his version she had a couple of brothers and it was more about like proving your, worth as a young woman in this like male dominated sort of sphere. Yeah. And then different writer, like it went through, I think something like 6 or 7 different writers. And then, the script changes and evolves. And then each one adds a different element, like whether like the father, I think at one point, the father was the one who wants Moana to go on the journey. And then that changes to the grandmother figuring out what one pass was all about, figuring out like how Maui would sort of relate. And so the final story credit, goes to, or the screenplay credit goes to Jared Bush, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 writers, or 7 sort of story by credits that sort of happens. So, I mean, again, much like a sort of a condensed version of like an oral tradition of something we get in like the Iliad or the Odyssey, where it's many passes have been had at this material.
Well, that brings me to one other question and connection I wanted us to consider is that Virgil is trying to emulate Homer, and Homer is this tradition of oral storytelling that was performative and music-like. And the one thing that made me really sad about Disney for a long time is like we removed the banging hits of music from movies, and then you bring Lin-Manuel Miranda back to put those. Let's not talk about Bruno, but damn, like that was so good. And so, you know, that's what I'm curious about is like, what do we think about the inclusion of music in these films, in this Moana story to help tell the story, and the fact that Virgil wasn't necessarily doing that with his version of this epic?
Like inserting big musical pieces?
I have no idea what I just asked.
I mean, the Aeneid would certainly have benefited from some big musical set pieces.
I wonder, has there been an Aeneas musical? I could almost see it happen.
There has not. Aeneas has been very underappreciated as a cinematic character, and I don't really know why. But I always start my Roman history class with the shot from Troy where Orlando Bloom gives Aeneas the sword of Troy.
Yeah, a thing that we all know and love, the Sword of Troy.
Right. And
we've complained elsewhere on this podcast about the Sword of Troy.
Yeah. And he's like, you know, as long as the sword, whatever, it doesn't melt it down, then our people, right, live, blah, blah, blah. And I always show it to my students because it's this great moment where, right, the Romans are kind of mythologically inserting themselves onto the Mediterranean scenes. But it's also one of the few cinematic, in fact, the only one that I know of, appearances of Aeneas, who is like, would make a fabulous like cinematic character. He's like bumbling and he's well-meaning and he has like the Dido story, right? And the Creusa, like, oops, I lost my wife. But I'm okay with it because I imagined her telling me that it's okay. Like, there's just so much you could do with the Aeneas story, like on film, and I do not understand why no one has done it, and that saddens me. But I hope that when they do, there are banging tunes.
Yeah.
Oops, I lost my wife. No, well, can you imagine just a little context? So yeah, his wife, like in the conflagration that is Troy at the end, just for audience members who, you know, everyone gets kind of separated, and then the way Aeneas sort of, and also the framing is that Aeneas is now telling this story to a woman he's in the process of seducing, and he tells this version where it's like, oh, we lost my wife, and then her ghost showed up and said, all right, it's cool, go on, you know, go do your thing. Which, like, if somebody said that to me and it's like, oh yeah, I left my wife behind, but like, don't worry, her ghost said it was okay, so I can go ahead with a clear conscience.
Red flag.
But this is itself a classic like rom-com cinematic trope. Like, how many times have we seen the widower who is like so torn up about his wife's death, but like with her dying breath, she said, go and like, you know, find yourself.
I hear Julia Roberts is single. Sorry.
Right. And like that, it's just all over the place. So you kind of get that. But so the woman that Aeneas is trying to seduce is called Dido, Queen of Carthage. And Aeneas is really trying to put the moves on her, but it doesn't really work. And so the gods have to intervene and they shoot her with like an arrow of desire. And then she kind of loses her mind over him. And you can kind of see why they needed to give her the extra push, because he's not a great like seducer, is Aeneas. Yeah. But, you know, he is, I mean, I don't know. I love Aeneas, but competent he is not. At least not with the ladies.
I was just going to say, is like, I was remembering back to the book Lavinia, and it seems like the premise of that book is the Lavinia goes to him because it's prophesied and not necessarily because she's attracted to him.
And it's either him or Turnus.
Oh no! In the end, she totally like the epilogue of Lavinia. She's all like, he was so hot, and we had such a great 3 years together. And he was so big and manly, unlike Turnus, who was like, you know, so, which, you know, he might have been. I'm not like dissing him. I'm just saying that.
to the point that I think there might be a market for this, kind of hero who is a bit bumbling or ineffectual or insecure or doubtful or something like that. Like literally yesterday in my mythology class, we were talking about Perseus and Bellerophon and adaptation and myths and hero's journey and these people as heroes. And one of my students said something to the effect of like, I want more flaws. Like I want characters with flaws now, right? Where Perseus and Bellerophon and those types of guys are a little simplistic, right? I tend to compare them often to like Link and Zelda, who's just like gets the sword, goes and defeats Ganon, and it just like sort of does it. See, like is given task, accomplishes task, curtains. But like now, like we expect a little bit more, I think, from storytelling, and are maybe a little bit more drawn to the, I don't know, just the Jaime Lannisters of the world, who are a bit more fraught as characters. I don't know why I jumped immediately to that example. I think that's a good example of a sort of a bad
that was an
person.
Interesting choice, Colin.
Well, my logic is that he comes to the forefront of my mind as like a bad person, but a good character.
Okay, so my other big Aeneas comparison is Daenerys Targaryen, right? Is someone who comes from a foreign land in pursuit of a home that she knows is hers because technically, right, her family is from there, but she's never been there. She doesn't know anything about it. She doesn't especially want to go, right? And she has to come in the head of a massive fleet and cause massive amounts of damage to kind of achieve, right, this return. Plus, she has to bring the dragons, who are both actual dragons, but also kind of symbolically, they're like the Penates, right? They're the ancient symbols of her family, and they're like her fake children, right? So she has like the whole Iulus Penates situation. She has fatherly figures who keep telling her to do completely the wrong thing. And then I don't know, are we still in a no spoiler phase with Game of Thrones? But right,
no, I think we're well past that.
Yeah,
I'm not caught up with House of Dragon, but that's another issue.
It's not been good.
Yeah. So she's an interesting Aeneas figure, but part of the reason she is because David Benioff is famously, right, the guy who produced Troy, right? So, and a lot of the scenes, well, not a lot, some of these scenes from Game of Thrones replicate or were written for Troy. So that's why we have the Shireen Iphigenia burning at the stake situation. So, right, that kind of cinematic cousinhood thing is kind of operational, right? David Benioff is someone who thinks about the classical myth and does kind of build them into his cinematic production. But I think the Daenerys comparison stands even without Benioff. But that brings me to the other thing that I have been wondering about, which is, do we care that all of these Aeneases are girls? Because I feel we have not touched on this gender issue.
I've been thinking gender swaps in the back of my head this whole time, and also how Disney treats, because not often a lot of their movies are necessarily male protagonists. A lot of the times females are supposedly, the protagonists. And like what's interesting about Mirabelle is that she doesn't have a superpower, but it's her nature of caretaking that is what saves the family. And Moana is interesting because she has like a relationship with the ocean, but it's also really, it's not as if she controls the ocean to do what she wants. She has a relationship with it, which is interesting.
This isn't really particular to Moana, but a thing that's I think it was actually the Joel Christensen, Sarah Bond article about the hero's journey. But one of the things of very often, like when you have women as hero's journey protagonists, very often it tends to kind of flatten or it treats them as sort of essentially masculine, like they aren't really operating sort of particularly in the capacity as women in those stories very often. I think like we can't ignore like the gender dynamic, particularly with either Moana. Like it would be a fundamentally different movie, I think, if it was Maui and say Moana were either like if you swapped that relationship, or if it was two guys on the boat or something like that.
Well, so one of the things that got lost in the Moana, I don't even know if it was in the early script, but in Polynesian mythology, Maui has a female goddess counterpart who is kind of crucial to all of his adventures. And obviously Moana cut that out completely. And Moana is a problematic movie for its depictions of kind of Polynesian culture, and Maui in particular is a sore point. But so Moana was right. She's supposed to be the female foil for Maui, which is why they cut the kind of original. But she is treated very masculinely, right? Even though they make this whole point about Maui calls her a princess, and she's like, I am quite the chief's daughter. But she is kind of not very much about her character is girly. Well, not girly, but like
specific to being a teenage
yeah,
girl. Yeah,
exactly. She's also not like a very deep character, right? She kind of starts and ends the same way. And the one time she tries to change, right, when she tries to like be a good girl and kind of hunker down on the island, she fails completely. So right, that I don't know that it necessarily kind of benefits feminism, right, to have Moana be a girl. And the same is true for Mirabelle, right? She's a woman of color who has to do all the care work.
Mm-hmm.
Like her grandmother and her sisters, while the guys shapeshift, like, I mean,
Yeah.
and play with animals. So, I mean, I don't know that we fully explored, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
One
on the
cooks
surface.
food, one's a
Yeah.
good listener, and then one is hysterical and creates horrible experiences for everyone as a result. Oh gosh.
Yeah. I think for Moana, I think the difference for me is at the ending when she meets Te Kā. It's sort of like, and I mean, maybe this is not, I don't know, maybe this is sort of falling in line with what we would expect from a female protagonist, but she like doesn't try to kill the enemy. Like, that's the thing that they try at the beginning and it like fails miserably. But then she like tries to understand her enemy toward the end. And like, on the surface, I'm like, well, that's a wonderful notion of trying to like be empathetic and compassionate, and like that wins in the end. But is that what we are expecting from all of our female protagonists, is to be I guess good listeners
Mm-hmm.
and nothing else?
So that sort of reminds me. So Patty Jenkins, who wrote directed the Wonder Woman movies, had an interview where talking about like, so in the first Wonder Woman, the sort of third act is just kind of a very like pro forma beat 'em up, smackdown between Wonder Woman and Ares. And Patty Jenkins sort of she says like I don't like that kind of like the solution is not to sort of like kill the enemy. And she says something to the effect of like, I wanted Wonder Woman to like win with a conversation rather than like a sword fight or something like that. And then we did get that in Wonder Woman 2, but that's a whole other wishing stone that I don't necessarily want to go down right now. But that idea of like Patty Jenkins wanted Wonder Woman to win via like an appeal to compassion or empathy or something like that, which like maybe does has a sort of a dimension of gender. The other thing I was thinking about is the way Te Kā like is almost a realization of like that kind of like eco-feminist, like goddess feminism or something. Women in the like Gaia figures or something like that. But
Or a Juno figure as like a misunderstood and like wronged woman.
Yeah. Although, I don't know. I still have an issue with this all-powerful goddess had something stolen, and instead of just taking it back, being all-powerful, she gets really angry and unreasonable and destroys the whole world because women can't control their feelings.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, but then, the kind of logical next question is, if girls can't win when they're like boys and they can't win when they're like girls, then what are they supposed to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is kind of the infamous glass ceiling. But it is a sort of right. It is an interesting question to say, okay, well, these heroic voyages templates are built for men and they're imagined for men, and so when we put women in them, are we like is the reason that it doesn't work because the whole thing was constructed for men from the beginning, and so it's just kind of right the master's house and the master's tools. Like, do we need to conceive of like a whole different type of adventure that figures around women?
Well, and I was thinking because around like what came around these same other films that were highly successful in comparison was Raya and the Last Dragon, where you did have a female protagonist who is a martial arts specialist and is fighting to some extent to achieve her hero goals, and it just falls flat. Like we actually allow this opportunity for violence to be an aspect of a solution that have always been granted to male heroic characters. But when we give it to a female character, we either like will make them the protagonist, but they can't be violent, or when they are violent, it just doesn't resonate with us as a result.
Yeah, the only one that I think kind of works is Anna, right, in Frozen, and they clearly don't know what to do with that because they have to literally freeze her at the end, right? And then, she gets to be queen at the end of Frozen 2, but it's still very much a like, I mean, I don't know, it kind of leaves you feeling dissatisfied. But Anna is great, right? Like she's feisty, she does things in her own way. She's not violent, but she can use violence when she needs to. But then, yeah, they don't quite go with it all the way. And it's actually interesting because my 5-year-old started out like all, girls in the world, like just thinking that Elsa was like the best thing ever because of the blonde hair, and she would like run around the house shouting, "You'll never see me cry." And my husband would be like, I'm gonna see you cry in like 2 minutes when you age. And then she had an Anna phase where she which we encouraged because we were like, Anna actually goes out and does stuff and she's kind and she's like, not self-obsessed, blah, blah, blah. So we encouraged that. And, she was into Anna for a bit. And then she was just like, then she hated Anna for the longest time. And now she's kind of like inching her way back. But it's this really like interesting to kind of track her emotional growth, right? With Anna as an index of, something.
So this is a question that maybe we actually should have started with. So obviously you have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old now, and I imagine there was a lot of Moana and Moana's colleagues sort of in your house. So like, what is the sort of your relationship to Moana and this in the Haimson Lushkov household?
No, it's horrible because now she's just watching My Little Pony and not even like we've been through the whole like My Little Pony universe, but now is like there's this awful version where they all like go through a portal and become like teenagers in Canterlot High School, and so it's like the worst of all worlds, and it's just
I can't.
It's appalling, and it has songs, and they are both really bad and are real earworms, and it's like it's awful. Like the socialization to become like mean, horrible teenagers starts very young, and I long for the days of Moana, and like
it's not still in demand, or it's not.
No, now we just have My Little Pony, Thomas the Tank Engine because of Theo, the 3-year-old. And weirdly, like a lot of nature stuff, like wild crafts and octonauts.
Yeah, that was neat.
I had one other thought in this aspect of swapping women into these traditional heroic roles and why maybe it falls flat or we don't like it is like, because I still feel this way about male Greek heroes. It's like, you're so bland, you're so boring. But is that because now we've gotten to see more diverse representation of what is heroic, and we like this model has existed and you don't question it because it maintains the status quo, and then we get really uncomfortable when the status quo is mixed up a little bit, but it's still doing the same thing. So like a woman in power exercising violence against other people, we're like, oh, that looks really bad because that's not normal. Well, isn't it still just as bad in the normal representation of it? And maybe that's why we don't like it.
I mean, I think there is some truth to that, right? We've kind of evolved beyond what makes you awesome is your ability to kill a lot of people. But I think part of the kind of, I don't really know how to phrase it elegantly, but there is a sense that to the extent that the violence is metaphorical, right? It kind of stands for the freedom that men have to, well, like get out of the house and do whatever they want for fun and have friends and like go on adventures and, get boozy on a beach with your mates. while your women are at home. But it's also kind of stands in for their freedom from care work and from emotional control, right? So Achilles can go berserk and kill thousands of people and then sulk by the ships and then stop. And there are never any consequences, right? Like he always gets to feel his feelings and somebody writes this massive poem about it and we celebrate him for 2,000 years. Whereas Dido, for instance, right, never gets to, like any woman in epic never gets to feel her feelings unless those feelings are, I mean, what do women ever feel in any ancient literature, right? Sadness because their kids have been thrown off a high building, desire because Odysseus swanned into their house like semi-naked, and that's pretty much it, right? Like, whereas, I mean, in that sense at least Aeneas is slightly more sophisticated because he's a reluctant hero. He has moments where he's a total douchebag. He has moments where he's trying, you can kind of see him trying to do the right thing, and you can kind of see him sort of trying to explore what it means if he got to have his way. And he's a very like bottled up kind of hero. But fundamentally at the end he still gets to let it all hang out and like feel all the feels and do whatever he wants. Whereas,
murder.
exactly. Whereas women just never get to do that. And even like Wonder Woman, you never get the sense that she's right. Women can't be emotional, right? So she has to be a bit more like calculated or rational about it, and then she's a bitch. But if she's not, then she's like hysterical, right? You can't. There's
It's a catch-22 kind of situation or something.
Yeah, which pretty much every woman you'll ever speak to will be like, this is not news, right? So
Leo, you're being a little saboteur. He's like just behind that computer, like chomping on all the wires.
I am a cat. Yeah. So I don't know if that actually was an answer to your question, Christy. I think I kind of like wandered off topic.
No, not like I think that's what's fun is, especially considering gender swaps, is like, how much of our ideas of certain characteristics are tied to gender. And then when we challenge that with gender swaps, how do we end up feeling about it as a result? And I think that's just something kind of cool to consider in media in general when we are attempting this. It gives us a chance to reevaluate, why do we heroes think of these in certain ways, because there's certain behaviors that we actually don't like, but we don't challenge it until we change it up.
Yeah.
So we're just over the hour mark. I want to check and make sure you got to run out the door or anything, because if no one has any other questions, I had one sort of final frivolous thought that I thought we might end on.
Sounds good.
Well, I just feel obligated to see if we have any thoughts on the whole like colonial imperialism, neo-colonial, there is the fundamental ethical question of what is our responsibility as people who fundamentally study a very white past when it comes to products of culture like Moana or Encanto or whatever that celebrate a fundamentally non-white experience. Are we like diminishing it? Are we celebrating it? Are we just treating it like everything else? In some ways, it's just a mirror of the whole man-woman, right, gender situation, but with slightly different nuances.
I don't have like an answer that I feel comfortable with, because I think it all makes me feel really icky, right? And I love thinking about reception, and I think it's really fun. And I think I don't want to feel icky. And so I I feel like I pull back from thoughts like that, which is probably the opposite of what I should do. I should really confront those icky feelings.
Well, I mean, there's the truth that, so I was reading about Moana today, and like I said, a lot of Pacific Polynesian people are unhappy with the way Moana depicts the people and the culture. And one of them said, because Disney, right, like they set up the Oceanic Trust and they were supposed to like have consulted heavily, but some people say having brown advisors doesn't make it a brown story. It's still a white story. So there is a sense in which like Moana is a white story, and as such we can do whatever we want to it. But I mean, I don't know, that feels like a cop-out.
I think that like we have this issue in archaeology too, where you're producing a final product. At what point do you consult, and what does consulting look like? At what point, when you've already established like who's going to be digging, what the research questions are going to be, and you're coming to people now of like, this is everything we found. Do you agree with our conclusions? It's like, that's consulting, but it's like, it's so far removed from the entire process that at the end of the day, this is a result of what the archaeologists think and not a collaborative process, truly, and truly representative of the people who you are telling the history of. So I think, that's just it, is like we gain a level of legitimacy because you have Dwayne The Rock Johnson voicing Maui. You have this young Polynesian woman voicing Moana. And it's like, yes, it's truly diverse, but it's like, yeah, but voice recording is literally one of the last things you do. Where in the process do we, make this a true story that's representative of the culture we're trying to represent? And Disney is notoriously bad about like wanting true representation. They want to tell the story that they believe is going to be most marketable, and then get the, this was the same with the Calliope, the performative feminism that happens. This is performative diversity in a lot of ways. And
Calliope in Netflix's Sandman we're talking about.
Sorry. Yep. But at the same time, we go back to that whole Lin-Manuel Miranda of like this story of displacement, like people for all of human history have had to move, had to navigate identity tied to place and new peoples and things like that. So how much of a story is just the human story? And, at what point do we try to emphasize the shared humanity between all of us? And at what point do you acknowledge the histories that exist from the othering of people? And I think that's really hard to balance.
I'm in pretty much agreement with Christy, where I'm sort of like that torn between, like, on the one hand, like, I think representation is really important. It's really just helpful for people to see a diversity of people on screen. But to that sense that the whole, like, maybe like from the root, it's kind of not an authentic, so as much as it purports to be some sort of authentic representation, it isn't really. But then so on the reception sort of angle, again, I'm sort of like, is this just an endeavor where like we bring everything into the umbrella that is this sort of imagined Western culture, Aeneas, and everything's just this, and it fits into our little box that we made. And then, and so the counterpoint, I like, as you say, hope, maybe I'm sort of biased and professionally invested in this answer, but that a productive meaning can maybe exist. And again, if meaning happens with the reader, a productive meaning maybe can be found via, say, the Aeneid against Polynesian myth or something like that. And even if there is no like immediate direct historical connection between the two, that in the sort of storytelling, like kind of what Christy was talking about, the themes we're sort of getting at, like I at least like to hope that we could maybe find something meaningful via, in sort of the collaboration, in a sort of comparative kind of look, even if it's, and so I guess we just to be aware of like that the comparison is comparison and not absorption or something like that. Well, integrate, destroying diversity via sort of all, saming or integrating everything.
So there's a guy called Simon Ferris who is a classicist. He works in New Zealand. I can't remember if it's Wellington or Auckland, but he works on the reception of the classics in Maori literature, so contemporary, like what Maori authors who are writing right now doing with classical inheritances. And New Zealand's an interesting case, right? Because however problematic their present interactions, they have kind of made a more conscious effort to kind of integrate, right, the white colonizer as part of an ecosystem rather than as I don't know, I'm probably mischaracterizing it. Anyway, so what Simon said was that one of the problems that you see when you work on this material is that a lot of time the response is, well, so-and-so is Maori, so like their whole frame of reference is supposed to be like Maori, and clearly they've just read like whatever, the introduction to the Aeneid, and they don't really have our like, lived breathing experience of the whole like, right, epic tradition. And so this is kind of like second-rate types of reception. And we were talking about it, and at some point we said that, when everybody now works on Bob Dylan, right? And, the Dylanologist will tell you that in some cases he read the introduction to the Aeneid, not the Aeneid itself, which is totally fine. But it's a good instance of like, it's fine if Dylan does it, right? But if a Maori author does it, then that's not right. That's a sign of ignorance. And I was like, on some level, right? If we in classicists believe that our object of study is worthwhile and has something to contribute to living a meaningful life, then it's the property of humanity, and like whoever wants to gets to play with it wherever they come from or wherever they're going. And we kind of have to be okay with that. I think part of the answer to that tension is to just give our stuff to other people and be like, do what you want, and kind of see what happens, and what classic looks like at the hand of people who have A, their own traditions, and B, have been the subjects, I get confused, of right colonial imperialism that has been bolstered by people who got first in classics from Balliol. So that doesn't strictly apply to Moana, because Moana is right a Disney product, but it would be interesting to see how this would be done by.
Mm-hmm. If it were reversed, right? If it was or even something like that, if a New Zealand or a Maori director and writer team did the Aeneid, what would that look like?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would love to watch that.
Yeah.
This might be so. I had this, like I said, a sort of, well, this is maybe, theirs is very loosely related, but a sort of a thought I had as I was doing a little bit of reading on Moana in preparation for this was that, so the idea, like the genesis of the idea of the plot, it comes from sort of historically that there were, people were sailing these islands in the South Pacific and Pacific about 3,000 years ago, and then they stopped for about 1,000 years and then started again. And so the story, at least according to the Musker and Clemens, they say that it's set about 2,000 years ago in the Pacific Islands, which would mean the thought I sort of had in preparation for the conversation, what if this story is happening 2,000 years ago, that somewhere else in the world around about the same time as the events of Moana would be taking place, Virgil would be penning the Aeneid, which was written about 2,000 years ago.
I thought you were going to take this in a different direction. I thought you were going to pull an Ovid and have like Moana and Aeneid like
cross paths.
Cross paths, exactly.
No, okay. No, I mean, if Moana is a historical film, which is a big jump in and of itself, it would be set about the same time as Virgil's lifetime.
That is a really cool thought, because like when we think historically, like we're supposed to be making connections between, but those connections we expect to be like, well, they're in contact with each other. And you don't always think about, well, what's happening way across the world where there is no contact, but it's happening at the same time. And that's why we get Ancient Aliens with pyramids, because there's an insistence upon that, of course, pyramids could only exist in the New World because there was either, the traditional racist assumption that Europeans made it over there somehow, and the newer one is aliens taught everyone how to do it.
There was just an article in BBC about Great Zimbabwe and like exactly this, of like nobody believed for a long time that it could have been built by Africans, but anyways. But anyway, that was just my sort of fun little factoid that they are Moana and Virgil might have been contemporaneous.
I kind of love that in a weird way.
And I should say, and I cannot believe I didn't think of it at a time, that when Colin just said, wouldn't it be cool if we had like an actual Polynesian person rewrite the Aeneid, that we do have Derek Walcott's Omeros, which is a Caribbean Iliad / Odyssey. So these things are out there and can be obtained and digested by interesting parts. But still, the point holds that someone needs to make a movie of the Aeneid, and it would be, I don't know, interesting to have it be done by a non-white.
Not your usual suspect.
Exactly.
Surprised the Brits haven't pulled it off. Like I could definitely see that a British endeavor, and it's just never.
There was an Italian Aeneid, I think, in like the 60s. I don't know if it had any.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, in the 60s and 50s in Italy, there was like a new either biblical or like Greco-Roman movie like every 3 months for like a while. But so it might have just got lost in the sauce. Pun intended. So
One day.
Should we end it there, I think? As I say my farewells?
Do we do we give our final assessment? Have we been?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Absolutely right. So yeah, how do we, what's the scale? What's the metric? how do we given 3 laurels? Like, I don't know.
Like, 3 out of 5 laurels. No, I would say 4 out of 4 because everything is the Aeneid, right? We have decided
everything can be the Aeneid, or the Aeneid can be anything.
Can be the Aeneid. So yeah, I stamp of approval.
Not Musker and Clements, but another, Disney Pixar. A great chef can be anyone, right? That's the idea. A great
anyone
Aeneid
can cook.
Yes, right. Anyone can Aeneid.
Anyone can Aeneid.
Exactly.
I mean, I was sold before we even started the podcast. I'm like, Moana, Aeneid. Yep, that sounds legitimate.
At the very least, it promises to be interesting, which is the main thing we were looking for when we sent out our feelers looking for ideas and pitches from people. I'm trying to think. There's some other good ones that we came back. I don't want to spoil them too ahead of the game, but we had some hot takes.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, reception is just the gift that keeps on giving.
Truly. Oh wait, hang on. That's the reception police I hear coming to arrest us all and throw us in literary critical jail. But yeah, Ayelet, thank you so much for coming on. It's always wonderful to have you back. If people want to hear or read or see more from you, where can they do that?
That's a good question. I'm on Twitter. At Dr. I still don't know what to call it. Floordash AHL. And otherwise, you can find me on the interwebs. I have my own website. Ayelet Haimson Lushkov.com. And all my stuff are there. And also I'm at UT, and you can come take classes with me and be corrupted by my socialist agenda.
Yeah, corrupting the youth. That's our business.
Like Colin and a little bit Eli.
And a little bit Eli, yes.
I couldn't fully corrupt you.
And my corruptive influence is already being felt elsewhere. So yeah, thank you so much. As usual, you can listen to our the movies we dig on Spotify and Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. Please like, review, and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter at @DigMovies. And we'll sort of be back with our regular programming, but we're hoping at least once a month or so we'll come in with these sort of special episodes. So if you like, please drop us a line. In that case, bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi.